Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bob Brooks, host of the Prudent Money Radio Show. Just want to let you know what we talked about today on the program, and it has to do with student loans and the enormous number of student loans that are in default and that are heading to default. And right now we're sitting at somewhere around 43 million Americans hold federal student loan debt, but it's the 25 million people who are in repayment mode that we're most concerned about. Up to 10 million borrowers are likely to be in default when it's all said and done. And the government's really not offering any type of situation to help people out. And I'm not talking about forgiving the loans. I'm just talking about a clear pathway to get into a payment program that can work. It may take a very, very long time, but at least they're got back into a healthy pay the monthly bill and get on their way to figuring out how to get out of debt once and for all. But it is a pretty big mess, and it doesn't seem like it's getting much attention in Washington. I've got John Hupalo. He's the college administration expert that's on the program once a month, and he comes on the program today and talks a lot about what this problem looks like and what a real mess this is heading towards. So that's on Prudent Money today. And if you got a question for me, you can always go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com, and send a question in. I'll get you taken care of. That's off the website, prudentmoney.com. Hope you enjoy the program.
KR Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, KYJC, Commerce, KMWC, Bethany. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, is the student loan system imploding? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, late pays and defaults, and it is only forecasted to get worse. College expert John Hupalo is here today to weigh in on the number of stories being reported. John, there certainly is a lot to talk about.
Bob, that's an understatement of the year. Nice to be with you this afternoon, though.
Good to have you on the program. I've been looking forward to talking to you. You know, let's start with some statistics. I found these stats off of what I think is a reputable site. So if fake news or even a little fake, this trend is pointing in the wrong way. You know, as of early 2025, approximately 43 million Americans hold federal student loan debt, totaling around 1.77 trillion. This includes both active borrowers and those in various stages of repayment or default. And they go to give a breakdown. In school, 5.9 million borrowers. Grace period, 1.1 million borrowers. In repayment, 25.4 million borrowers. You know, it's interesting, John, if you really start playing with the numbers here, you would think that if they're expecting 10 million people to default, that would come out of the 25.4 million borrowers, I guess. But however you slice and dice these numbers, they're not good.
They're not good, Bob, and they're probably going to get worse. And you and I predicted this back in 2021 when the student loan pause began, and said, well, you know, what's going to happen here is student loan borrowers, whether they can afford to make the payments or not, are not going to make them because they don't have to. They're going to get out of the habit of making them. And the question will be, how long is it going to last, that pause? And the pause is over, and the repayment period has begun. And the Department of Education announced back in the end part of April that on May 5th, so last Monday, they're going to go and actually start collecting on those defaulted loans. So the reality of all this is going to come and strike some folks, I think, with a whole batch of cold water that's not going to be welcome.
So they go into the collection process. I mean, what does that debt collection process look like? I mean, there's they can garnish wages and I think take away other benefits from you. But if you're a student that's maybe just gotten a job or whatever you're doing, it's not like you've got $40,000 or $50,000 sitting around to be able to pay it back.
Yeah, Bob, that's right. And the problem with the whole thing is that if you've just graduated and you graduated with, say a job that's starting you with a salary that's greater than what your student loan debt is, you shouldn't have a problem there. It's really the people who have had loans for some period of time. They've gotten into trouble in the past. Maybe in 2017 or 18 or 19, they were in default on their loan, and the interest started to pile up on that. Because when you default on a loan, Bob, the interest doesn't go away. It actually starts making the problem a heck of a lot worse, right? So instead of a $10,000 loan, now it's $10,000 plus all that interest that you didn't pay. And then, lo and behold, 2020 comes around and there were no required payments. So it might be for 4 or 5 or 6 years, folks who were in trouble before thought there was going to be some loan forgiveness, that this big headache would go away, and they'd be on the road back to having good credit. And that did not happen that way. And there was no question when the new administration took charge in Washington, those loan forgiveness programs were going to die very quickly, and they were going to restart the payment programs as quickly as they possibly could. And so that's what's happening now.
Yeah, and I don't want anybody to misinterpret it, what my views on this are. I mean, I don't believe we should wipe all the loans free and let people off the hook, but it seems like there needs to be a step between the money they owe and the collection process that makes this, I hate to use the word fair, but makes this a little bit more of a process that they can use and actually get out of debt. I mean, what does the debt collection process look like? If you're one of those, you've defaulted on your debt, what would you expect?
Yeah, Bob, and I would tell folks they should go to studentaid.gov because there's a lot of detail here that I'm not going to get into in the next several minutes. But at the end of the day, the reality is that the government, the lenders, really don't want borrowers to be in default. And they do want them to pay. And then the question is, okay, how much can they pay? What are their current economic circumstances to figure all that out? So the Department of Education, for a long time now, this is not very recent, this is for a long time, has said to borrowers, you basically have 3 options when your loan goes into default. You can make the payment, and as you said, if they don't have the cash lying around, they're not going to be able to make the payment. And the reality is, unless they were doing something kind of crazy, deciding that they just didn't want to pay because they didn't want to pay, that they're in a position where they just don't have the money. So they've got to do something else. And the government says, okay, you can do 1 or 2 other things. You can enroll in one of our income contingent or deferred repayment plans or consolidate your loans into one. And that starts the process then of trying to get a loan payment in line with what a borrower might be able to afford. And then the second is a really important program which they call loan rehabilitation, which allows a borrower basically to say, okay, I've had trouble in the past, I want to make the payments, and you contact the student loan servicer and they'll determine what those payments are. And generally to rehab a loan, and what that loan rehabilitation or rehab means is that they're going to take that loan out of default. So that's really important because once the loan comes out of default, a lot of other things that can be helpful will accrue, and we can talk about that. But again, where does this all start? What the Department of Education said in mid-April is if your loan is in default, you should contact your student loan servicer or contact the Federal Student Aid Default Resolution Group. So the Default Resolution Group has been set up. Bob, I haven't seen any anecdotal evidence of whether or not the Default Resolution Group is actually doing a great job or not. I presume that they probably are because I haven't heard anything, but it's only been a few weeks. But at the end of the day, it's going to the student loan servicer and saying, okay, I want to find a way to get my loan out of that default status. Because what you said at the beginning, and I didn't pick up on, but I'm going to talk about for a minute right now, when a loan is a default, it's really nasty. Like, this is not going to go away. These loans are generally not dischargeable in bankruptcy, which means even if you go and say to a judge, look, I can't pay, I want to try to discharge these loans like my credit cards or some of the other debt I have, unless you show severe economic hardship, and judges don't take that lightly, they basically say, sorry, you're going to still owe your debts for student loans even after we take care of some of these others. So, like, what can happen? You asked that question. You said wage garnishment. The government can take up to 15% of a borrower's paycheck to start getting some of their money back on those student loans. They can do the same thing to a tax refund. They can offset Social Security payments. They require the borrower who's in default to actually pay the collection costs on those loans. So not only are you paying the interest that's accruing in the principal, but the additional collection effort that's being made against you, you're funding that yourself. The interest, as I said, continues to accrue no matter what. You may not be able to buy or sell real estate, according to the Department of Education's own website. You lose federal eligibility for other student aid programs. So if you're trying to go back to school to get a better education and be able to repay these loans, you're not going to be able to do that under the federal program. And lastly, for those holding professional licenses, you may not be able to renew your license because the Department of Education will have a stamp saying this person owes us money, and until they pay, we want to make sure that we're taking every action we can to give them an incentive to get back on the wagon and paying. So it's really very nasty and very quick downfall. It's not progressive. It's okay, all this stuff is going to come at you, and the government's going to do whatever they can to collect on that loan.
Yeah, it's a pretty fierce process. And, I've looked through and read a lot of different articles in a lot of the news outlets. And what was disturbing to me, John, and I'm sure you see the same thing, is there's not very many good solutions that bridge the gap between where you are right now and going into default, or you're in default and trying to repay, and the collection process and all how that works. And but the few things you can do, it doesn't seem like anybody's communicating them.
That's a big part of the problem, Bob, and they're trying to rectify that. It's interesting. I read something very recently where a borrower found out what the remedies were from TikTok. Now I think you and I are the generation where we wouldn't get our information from TikTok, but this borrower, in an article that I read, an incredible newspaper, said, oh, yeah, I saw something on TikTok that they're going to garnish my wages, so I figured I better figure out what that's all about. So this idea of communicating, and I think, honestly, communicating in ways that borrowers now will receive the communication. Clearly, folks don't pick up their cell phones. I get 10 spam calls a day. I don't pick up a number I don't get, so it's going to be hard to reach me. Emails, people don't really care much about emails. Snail mail, I check my mailbox now every 4 or 5 days, quite honestly. It's just a different world, and hopefully the Department of Education will recognize that they've got to get this communication to the borrowers in a timely way, in a medium that is important to them. Maybe it is radio, maybe it's TikTok, whatever it is, but wherever they're reaching them, podcasts, whatever the social media outlets are, the folks who are defaulting are the ones who are getting their news from those sources. So I think you hit the nail on the head that trying to get the word out the right way is really important here. And the last thing you want is that collection notice to show up at your door to say, okay, all these nasty things are now come upon you because you haven't reacted to what we've been trying to get you to react to.
Yeah, you went from a situation with President Biden that was a gentle, kinder way of going about it to, not that I don't think I've heard Trump say anything really much about it, but to an administration who's, let's collect this debt. Let's get this going. Let's do what we have to do. And I guess it poses a question, and I'd like to get your feedback on it. And once again, I'm not coming from a spot of, I think every debt should be cleared or anything like that. I do think, though, that politicians should take some of the blame of the condition of the system. I mean, it's one of those things, they've helped people get into all this debt. Now, they didn't put a gun to their head and say, sign the papers and take all this debt on, but they didn't do much in the way of a mechanism to help you protect yourself from yourself. And,
Bob,
so what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I think that they should really acknowledge this as, hey, this is a big problem if we don't do something about it.
Well, I agree with you. And the bottom line for me on the whole thing is that from 1965 until today, and 1965 is when really what we'll call the modern, even though it's not particularly modern now, it's 50 years old, but the modern student loan system was born, and it was born to provide access to education. It was not born to provide a good, solid financing mechanism for that education. And so the schools were incented to run up their costs because there was free money coming from the government, basically. And the politicians then did kick the ball onto the political field. And so I think we try to be really careful, both of us, to not talk about, well, this is a Democrat or a Republican or what it might be, because that politicization of this whole process has been part of the problem on both sides of the aisle, right? So what you're seeing now, and I thought your question at the beginning, is the program imploding? And I actually went back in the dictionary and said, okay, so what does imploding actually mean? It says collapse or cause to collapse violently inward. And I thought that's really interesting because the current administration believes they're fixing an implosion, right? And so you can have whatever view of that you want, but at the end of the day, what you said, I think, is really critical, is that this has become a political issue, and the reality is that families and students who are trying to do the right thing, which is go to some program after high school to become better educated so they can get a good job and be good wage-earning Americans and do the right thing, there has not been the proper setup for them to be successful. And I think the politicians on both sides of the aisle should bear a lot of that responsibility. They made it too easy to borrow. Then they made it too easy to think you're not going to have to repay. And now we've got the difficult reality of we have to pay. And so this is not a great situation for students, and I do have some sympathy, some empathy along the path, because in some ways the politicians really laid out a course that was I'm going to say unfair, to use the word that you used on the other side of that coin. Fair or unfair, it is what it is, but it does have some feeling that it could have been done a lot better if the proper care were taken along the way.
Yeah, I just see a set of politicians who don't want to touch this, and it's going to go too far, and it's going to just be in such a mess, and it also begs the question: what are we going to do in the future to avoid this from being a problem, to continue to be a problem? And you almost have to give, if parents are depending upon taking a lot of loans out, you almost got to give them a runway to figure out how to save and get a different game plan together, because it's not the option of borrowing is not as what it is today.
No, Bob, I think that's exactly right. And very interestingly, you talked about not hearing from the highest levels of this administration about the student loan programs. And I think that's because what's going to happen here is that any of these fixes are going to be buried in a very large budget reconciliation bill that's going to come in the fall. So we talk in Washington about Christmas tree legislation, where they hang everything on it they possibly can. And I think what's going to happen is that there will be one piece of legislation with the tax cuts that the administration wants, with all the other programs that they want, and included in there will be very specific things related to student loans. For instance, just the other day, the Ways and Means Committee let out a statement that said, the loan forgiveness has previously been fully tax exempt at the federal level. So you get a loan forgiveness for $10,000, you don't have to pay tax on that. Well, it's going to roll back to where it's going to be tax-free, but only if it's for death or total and permanent disability. Again, this is a proposal, but it's going to come as part of the 2025 budget reconciliation bill. Same thing, House Education and Workforce Committee about 2 or 3 weeks ago rolled out what changes they want in the federal student loan program. And interestingly, Bob, they got to one of the points you made. They want to limit the amount of loans that a parent can take through their PLUS loan program. They're going to limit that the current proposal at $50,000 per year for a $200,000 total cap. Still a lot of money, but potentially a lot less than the full cost of tuition and fees and all the rest of it. So they're trying to get at it, but they're going to get at it in a way that I think is going to slide a little bit under the radar. You're not going to read about the Higher Education Act of 2025 and hear the changes. You're going to read about this as a line item in a huge bill of many line items, maybe hundreds of line items, and that's how they're going to go about making these changes.
The website that John has is mycollegecorner.com. Go check it out if you've got a student that's on his way to, or she is on their way to college, someone in high school. Great information, mycollegecorner.com. You know what doesn't help the situation, and you couldn't have more of a perfect storm, is that the dismantling of the education department. And there was an article that came out in Market Watch, I believe, that talked about they're going to really take the brunt of the student loan borrowers are going to feel the brunt of the education department layoffs. I mean, it seems like even kind of what I've read is that even before all these layoffs occurred, things were not necessarily organized and in good shape.
Well, that's right. And, Linda McMahon, our Secretary of Education now, was basically put in place at the Department of Education to dismantle it. And so we haven't really heard much about that in the last month or so, but the plan is to try to take some of the functions of the Department of Education and move them to other federal agencies. One of the proposals was to move a lot of the federal student loan programs to the Small Business Administration, those kinds of things. Some of the programs going to other agencies as well. So, again, haven't seen much about that because we're starting instead to hear a lot about the changes they want to make to the federal student loan program itself. And again, that will come through the budget reconciliation bill. But at some point, sometime down the road, you and I are going to have the conversation about where the federal student loan programs land at the SBA or someplace else, and what that could mean for student borrowers going forward. But for right now, they talked about the implosion, and I think the administration believes they're fixing the implosion. They're going right at the core of the issue. What's going on with these borrowers who are defaulting? What's going to go on with borrowers who are going to get loans? And your listeners should know the changes that are coming are unlikely, and I'll go on a limb and say they're not going to happen for this next academic year. Starting July 1, 2025 is when the new student loans the new rate will take effect. And by the way, they're a little bit lower than they were last year, so that's good news for student loan borrowers. But the changes that we're going to see will most likely take effect somewhere around July 1 of 2026. So we have a little time to figure all this out.
It's interesting. You look at when we were talking about the everything that was going on with Biden and the deferment of payments and everything, and you could just see this problem imploding and boiling over. Yeah, I mean, it was just so easy to see. Anybody that would read an article could see that. But, John, it's almost like we're seeing the exact same thing again, and just in a different way. Now the accumulation of defaults. I mean, that's at some point that starts to even affect the economy.
Well, it will, because one of the things that we didn't talk about very much is that when you're in default or even large 90-day plus delinquencies, they start reporting that on your credit report. And once that happens, Bob, you have two things happen. Anyone who wants to lend you money looks and sees that you have a low credit score and says, oh, I've got to charge you more interest on the loan or the credit card or whatever it is, because you are more likely to go into default, and so you're a problem for me, so I've got to charge you more money. Or I'm not going to make a loan to you. So if I want an auto loan or I need to do something else or a bank buy real estate or whatever it might be, the lender could look at that and say, you know what, your score is going the wrong way. You're in default on a federal student loan. I'm not going to lend to you. I'm not going to extend your credit card. I'm not going to give you a car loan. So all this is very serious, and I think you're right that with, as you say, $5 to $10 million, 5 to 10 million student loan borrowers out there, that's a lot of money, a lot of people who are trying to buy things that they might not be able to get.
Real quick, we have about 2 minutes left. Oh, I do have a question for you that's come up quite a bit of times, that if you're a situation where you've got all these different loans and you got all these payments, how difficult is it, and what do you have to process? Do you have to go through to get that consolidated?
If you have multiple student loans, the consolidation process is not difficult, and it all starts at the student loan servicer and what's necessary. Now, there are some hoops that need to be jumped through for parents who have plus loans. It's a little bit convoluted, and it's actually very technical. So again, talking to the student loan servicer and getting an idea of precisely what's required for any particular borrower's loan situation, that's always the first place to start. The loan payments are going to be consolidated, which means 4 or 5 or 3, or no matter how many you might have, will be turned into one loan. So it'll be a new loan with a new interest rate, a new repayment schedule, and that allows you then to budget more accurately for the total cost of those loans over time. The idea of consolidation is just to make the payment process a little easier. One payment instead of 3 or 4, one loan, and ability then to just keep track of one problem at a time. And so the student loan hopefully comes off the problem list, because now you've got a consolidated loan that makes sense for your own economic situation.
Once again, the website is mycollegecorner.com. We didn't even get to talk about Harvard, so I guess we'll have to punt that till next month.
Next month.
John, always good talking to you.
Bob, you as well. Have a great month. Thank you.
You too. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. What a mess that this student loan story is turning out to be. We'll have to see what happens, and if the politicians will take it seriously. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.